The hearing room in Geneva felt colder than usual, not because of the temperature, but because of the tension. Everyone inside knew this wasn't going to be an ordinary session. Cameras were set. Reporters leaned forward. The spotlight was fixed on two very different men seated across from each other. On one side sat Captain Ibrahim Traoré, young, quiet, focused. His military uniform didn't just show rank, it told a story of someone who rose from the battlefield to the presidency of Burkina Faso, a soldier turned leader, a man used to facing bullets, not microphones. Opposite him, Kash Patel looked like he owned the room. Clean-cut, confident, and well-practiced. He straightened his tie and tapped his notes like he'd done this 100 times before. He had the look of someone who believed the outcome was already written. To him, this was just another hearing, another day to defend his actions with charm and credentials. But what he didn't know, or maybe didn't care to see, was that the man sitting across from him didn't play by Washington's unspoken rules. Captain Traoré didn't interrupt. He didn't smile to please the cameras. He simply sat, listening, watching, and waiting. The chairman gave Patel the floor, and Patel wasted no time. His opening words were smooth but sharp. He brought up his experience with US presidents. He mentioned national threats he had helped prevent. Then, with a grin that barely hid the arrogance beneath it, he took a swipe at Traoré. Being a leader is one thing, he said. Understanding intelligence and national security, that's a whole other level. A few in the room exchanged looks. The tone had shifted. But Traoré, he didn't move. No change in expression. Just steady eyes and still hands. He let Patel speak. Let him list all the reasons he believed Traoré didn't belong in that chair. And while Patel smiled at his own words, Traoré gently tapped the folder in front of him. It wasn't random. It was quiet preparation. Those who knew him, soldiers who had fought beside him, would later say that was the moment they recognized. His mindset had changed. Not aggressive, not defensive, just ready. No one could have guessed what was coming. They thought they were watching a hearing, but they were about to witness something else. A lesson in truth delivered not with volume, but with precision. In that stillness, something was building. And when it landed, it wouldn't come as a scream. It would come as a sentence, one line that would travel far beyond those four walls, leaving even the most experienced voices in the room completely silent. As the hearing moved into deeper questioning, the tone in the room began to shift. European lawmakers took turns asking Patel about specific lapses in the handling of sensitive documents. Their questions were detailed about protocol breaches, lack of logs, missing records. But Patel danced around every one of them. He spoke in polished phrases, saying things like contextual clarity and classified discretion. Every time he was pushed, he slipped into a carefully rehearsed line about how his service had been misunderstood by people unfamiliar with national security, and for a while, it seemed to work. A few committee members leaned back in their chairs, not entirely convinced, but unsure where to press harder. Then the chairman cleared his throat and said, "Captain Traoré, you may begin." The room grew still again. Traoré spoke slowly at first, beginning in French to acknowledge the multilingual nature of the setting. Then, switching to English, he got straight to the point. "This is not about politics," he said calmly. "This is about responsibility." He didn't refer to himself. He didn't try to match Patel's tone. He stayed focused, looking directly at the committee members as if speaking to each of them one by one. Then, for the first time, he turned toward Patel. "You stated on record," he said, lifting a page from his folder, "that all classified materials were reviewed and returned under your supervision." Patel nodded, a little smugly. "Correct." Without reacting, Traoré picked up a second document. "But here," he said, "in your sworn deposition, you said, and I quote, 'I was not directly involved in any review process.'" A few people in the gallery leaned forward. That was a clear contradiction. Patel shifted. "Context," he said, "matters." "I agree," Traoré replied, "but facts matter more." Patel's voice grew sharper. "Look, Captain, I understand that where you come from, things may work differently. But in Washington, these processes are built on truth," Traoré said, cutting in gently. Patel tried to laugh it off. "You need years of experience in intelligence circles to understand how these systems operate. I was a soldier long before I was a president," Traoré answered. "I know what it means to follow orders, and I know what it means to give them. But no order changes the truth." It wasn't a punch. It was a steady hand pushing the wall brick by brick. Patel grew defensive. "This hearing is just performance," he snapped. We should be focusing on real threats. The truth is always a real threat, Traoré said. He continued to present contradiction after contradiction. In one instance, Patel had claimed he verified the security of storage rooms. In another, he testified that he relied entirely on others to report back. Traoré didn't raise his voice. He didn't accuse Patel of lying. He simply lined up the facts and pointed to the holes. Patel tried again to discredit him. You don't have the background to understand these layers of security. I don't need layers to see a broken promise, Traoré said. His voice didn't change. His tone didn't waver. But the room felt different. What started as a formal hearing had become something else, a quiet reveal of contradictions. Too large to ignore, Patel kept talking. About his years in Washington. About how many times he had been trusted with secrets. But it didn't help. Each attempt to reassert himself only made him seem more defensive. Every answer he gave was met by Traoré with a follow-up, a document, a quote, a direct question that didn't let him wiggle free. At one point, Patel sighed heavily and muttered, "You're twisting my words." Traoré just looked at him. "I am showing them." That line didn't land with a bang, but it stayed in the air. Heavy, clear. By now, the room was silent except for the voice of Traoré and the soft scribble of journalists taking notes. The cameras zoomed in slightly, catching the tension in Patel's jaw, the stillness in Traoré's face. Patel was no longer smiling. His confidence had thinned. And Traoré hadn't even raised his voice once. This wasn't a shouting match. It was a slow, steady undoing. One contradiction at a time. The air in the room felt like it had thickened. No one said a word, but everyone could feel that something was about to happen. The chairman, who had stayed mostly quiet, leaned back in his seat, folding his hands, watching closely now. He could tell this wasn't like the other hearings he'd seen. This wasn't just testimony. It was turning into something deeper, a reckoning. Captain Traoré sat up straighter, then slowly placed his hand flat on the table. It wasn't a dramatic move. It was steady, controlled, but it grabbed the room's attention. He looked directly at Patel and said, "Mr. Patel, you've built your career around saying you protect the truth. But truth doesn't come with contradictions." Patel scoffed. "Captain, with all due respect, you don't understand how these systems work. This is high-level stuff, national security, intelligence structures, not something you pick up in basic training." He was still trying to brush Traoré off, still trying to talk down to him like a teacher scolding a student. But Traoré didn't blink. "You're right," he said quietly. "I don't understand how a man can say one thing under oath and the opposite in front of a camera and still call it the truth." There was a pause, then a soft gasp broke the silence. Not loud, but clear enough to echo in a room where everyone had gone still. Patel's face shifted. The calm smirk he'd carried all day was fading. He straightened his jacket and tried to defend himself. Those were different settings. The media takes things out of context. There are layers. Traoré was still watching him, still silent, still calm. "I have one final question," he said. "During your training, were you taught to verify document status before certifying anything was returned to an intelligence agency?" Patel hesitated. His mouth opened, but nothing came out at first. He blinked, buying time. "It's complicated. Was it part of your training?" Traoré asked again. The words were gentle, but firm. "Yes, in part." "And did you follow that training when you signed the certification?" Patel shifted again. "At the time, I believed." This time, Traoré cut in. "Belief does not excuse false certification, Mr. Patel." The interruption wasn't loud, but it landed with weight. It was the first time Traoré had spoken over him, and no one missed it. There was another pause. Then, slowly and clearly, Traoré delivered the sentence that would carry far beyond this room, the one that would be played on every news channel, quoted in classrooms, and discussed around the world. "In my country, when a soldier lies in uniform, he shames the nation, but when a man lies under oath, he endangers the world." It hit like thunder. No shouting, no anger, just truth, spoken plainly. And that made it impossible to ignore. For a few seconds, the entire room went still. Not one paper rustled. Not a single whisper was heard. Even the camera crew, who usually moved quietly to adjust angles, froze in place. Some in the audience looked toward Patel, who sat speechless. His mouth was slightly open, his eyes blinking fast, but he had no answer. No spin, no recovery. Even the chairman, who had kept a professional distance all day, looked caught off guard. It was as if time had stopped for just a moment, not because of loud drama, but because of quiet truth, and in that silence, everyone understood. Something had changed. The line had been drawn. The silence wasn't empty, it was full. Full of the realization that words carry weight, and when someone speaks without fear, even the most powerful lies can collapse. No one needed to say anything. The sentence had done the work. Patel barely held himself together after that moment. The sharp tone he'd carried earlier was gone. He struggled to respond, fumbling through short answers and leaning on the phrase, "I don't recall," even when the questions were simple. It was clear to everyone watching in that room and, on the live stream, that something had shifted. He no longer looked like a man in control. He looked like someone trying to escape without admitting it. The energy in the room didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to the man in the green uniform who hadn't raised his voice once. The hearing ended without much ceremony, but the real impact had already begun. That one sentence, just a few words spoken with calm certainty, took off like wildfire. Within an hour, the video clip had been viewed over 2 million times. By the end of the night, news anchors were calling it the moment that changed the entire tone of the investigation. Headlines popped up across the internet: Traoré drops hammer on Patel, silence after one sentence, when truth speaks without shouting. In Africa, university students shared the clip in group chats and debate clubs. Some said they had never seen a leader from their continent carry himself with that much quiet force on the global stage. In Europe and the US, political commentators, who had never even heard of Traoré, were suddenly quoting him on air. A few legal experts began reviewing Patel's sworn statements, pointing out real discrepancies that might lead to further review. The phrase "Traoré had spoken when a soldier lies in uniform, he shames the nation," was printed on posters, turned into TikToks, and written on whiteboards in classrooms. Hashtags like #TruthInUniform and Traoré Speaks Truth started trending in different languages. But while the world watched, Traoré didn't celebrate. He didn't tweet. He didn't hold press conferences. When asked in a quiet interview whether he had rehearsed that line or planned to deliver it, he simply said, "No, but I came prepared for when the truth would need to be spoken." It wasn't pride. It was responsibility. Even Patel's allies began to soften their tone. One former colleague, speaking off the record, admitted he underestimated Traoré. "Most of us did," another added. He walked in thinking this was just another hearing. He didn't realize the man across from him wasn't there to play the game, he was there to end it. But Traoré refused to let the moment be about him. In a statement to reporters, he said, "I did not come to prove someone wrong. I came to speak clearly when the facts were unclear." That was what stayed with people: the calm, the control, the refusal to gloat. He didn't brag. He didn't take a victory lap. He stood for something simple, something powerful: accountability. In a world full of noise, it was the quiet moment that changed everything, and in the days that followed, as the world kept playing that sentence again and again, people weren't just listening to what he said. They were remembering how he said it. Calm, clear, certain, just the way truth should sound.